we now turn to the youth to inspire us with their vision for youth leadership in climate-smart landscapes. Here at GLF, we really value our thriving Youth in Landscapes community, and we have been impressed and inspired by the efforts taken in the preparation for this discussion forum you're about to see, starting with a day of workshops on Saturday working towards climate-smart leadership. The outcomes of those workshops will be now shared in what is sure to be a dynamic and energizing event, and we are looking forward to hearing what the future of youth leadership in climate-smart landscapes will be. It is my pleasure to hand over to Esther and the Wolf team, and we wish you a successful session. Thank you.
Like I said, it was in Nairobi, and now we are here in Wageningen. And what we are here to do is we're looking at landscapes to aid in the fight against climate change. So this event is being organized by WULF. And WULF is Wageningen University Youth in Landscapes Forum. So we have also created a platform. And by we, I mean the people that are standing in the corners. We're a team, a diverse team of Wageningen students. And we were really inspired by the GLF, the Global Landscape Forum. So what we have done is we've created a platform that is based here in Wageningen. Because our aim, or at least what we aspire to do, is to link up the critical thinkers in Wageningen and also the wider Wageningen bubble to the global community at the GLF. Because simply put, we know this is where it happens and we want to share it, but we also want to be a part of advancing the conversation. And today we are here to advance the conversation on climate change. So this is a panel discussion, and I personally ask myself the question, why should we be dedicating time to a panel discussion when we could be out there planting trees? So this is a conflict, I think, that resonates with most of us. And the reason being, and I also discussed this with the panelists, is to connect. So that's the primary reason for why WULF has done this, is to connect. We've connected here physically, but we also are connecting virtually. So to the rest of the GLF community, to all you guys out there. And this is a way to give people with inspiring stories a platform to share their experiences. It's also a way to give those marginalized and those impacted or left behind a voice. And it's also a way to share knowledge. This is a knowledge-sharing platform for transformative change, because we actually want our knowledge to generate impact. We want it to have societal and environmental relevance. So yes, we think that advancing the conversation is a way to inspire courageous action, and that it's a way to keep the fire burning. So that's why we are here, and we have organized a 2-day partner event for the GLF in Kyoto. And our aim is to discuss the role of the co-creation of knowledge for climate-smart landscapes. Now, to do this, we've taken 3 themes: activism, research, and practice. So we're looking at what is the role of activism, what is the role of research, and what is the role of practice-based approaches to mitigating climate change or adapting to climate change. And then what role does it play in co-creating climate-smart knowledge? So we've asked ourselves, who is climate smart? What is climate smart? When should we be climate smart? Where should we be climate smart? And also why or how? So we're drawing insights from activists, from researchers, from farmers, from entrepreneurs, from people working within the policy dimensions to showcase some of the initiatives that are happening in our own backyard here in Europe and the Netherlands, but also from the rest of the world. So this panel discussion was critically informed by a series of workshops, and I am seeing some familiar faces, but for the community out there, I'm going to give a bit of a wrap-up of what these workshops were, because we thought that it was very important to have the behind-the-scenes feature in this panel discussion. So we believe that workshops are an invaluable space for weaving together these global narratives, from the radical sort of change makers on the front lines, to those behind the scenes, and therefore, connecting the ideas, the philosophies, and the approaches to the actual on-the-ground solution. So we're trying to get that holistic picture. So before I show you a video of what the workshop day was all about, I'm going to give you a brief outline of what we did, and this is important because I'm going to try and mediate the take-home messages from the 7 workshops that we had, and I'm going to try and bring that into the panel discussion. Then we'll have a 5-minute pitch from each of our panelists, and then we will start with the discussion where we'll look at the role of activism, research, and practice. So we had the Food Forest Project, and we had Renew and Common Land host workshops on practice-based approaches through ecological restoration or actually integrating food forests in Europe for climate change. We had Ethnovision and Hater, a PhD student in Wageningen, and Christina Hansen sort of explore alternative research methodologies using sound, participatory approaches, but also visual methods that sort of are a way of democratizing science and empowering people in when we conduct research, so the local actors on the ground. Then we had Otherwise, Henry Mentik, Milieu de FNC, which is the Dutch Friends of the Earth, and Selina and Raki. Selina is a Mapuche from Chile, which was amazing that she was able to join us, and Raki as well, an indigenous representative from Western Papua, and they gave us their perspectives on climate justice and climate movements. So if you just look up there, that's our video. Can you guys see? So with these workshops, what we wanted to do was to create a bit more of an informal space, so people are actually more willing to discuss and be a little bit more critical. And then this was the reason why we thought that the workshops were so important. And we also thought that just having 7 panelists just wasn't enough perspectives, because we really wanted to look at it from all angles. So yeah, that was the workshop day, and it was truly magical. I think it was a really nice day, and we were so lucky with everything, the weather. And now I think we can start introducing the panelists one by one. I'm going to start by Fabian, who is the coordinator of Dutch Plant Protein Farmers Organization, and maybe he enlightens us as to what that is. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And indeed, as you say, I'm a coordinator of a group of farmers. We're still only 6, but there are a lot of members wanting to join. We want to grow more plant-based protein here in the Netherlands. So then you talk about plants as soy, but also lupin, or other kind of beans, or high-protein grains. And besides that job, I am also started to farm myself. I studied here at the University of Wageningen. I did my master's on climate studies. And I realized that whereas I thought after graduating that I knew a lot about it, that in reality, in talking to farmers, I didn't know anything. So I didn't, I didn't dare to take that conclusion yet. So before doing that, I worked as a research assistant at the program from Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security from the CGAR, a big research center here in, also partly based in Wageningen. And then I went on to do some work as a researcher in Amsterdam. But at the end of every day, I often felt satisfied. And maybe you know this, because I believe I'm not the only one. Actually, let's give it a try. Who's been working at your desk, because that was most of the work, really hard all day, and it comes home, lies in bed, and asks him or herself, what have I done? Also the panelists, it's sad. I'm actually happy to see that some people don't recognize this, and there are people who feel that is their role, but I didn't. So I wanted to do something for which I could use my hand, because every time somebody asked me to help out, move some things, even though it was like, I don't know, half an hour during the day, and the rest of the day I would, be busy with a computer, I would still feel more satisfied. So I thought, hey, let's try to turn that around. Let's try to make that manual labor my main activity during the day. And then actually to make a long story short, I found a farmer who was willing to rent some land out to me. I met him in February, so that's like 3 months ago. I decided to move there, and as I was moving there, I decided to, instead of renting half a hectare, rent 2.5, and that's now become 3.5 hectares, and just grow those plant-based proteins myself. And the reason why I think why I wanted to do that is that I myself eat I try to eat no or as little animal products as possible. But most of them, don't come from here. And let's also, I don't know if that's possible, let's give it a try. Who yesterday, during the whole day, ate some plant-based protein? So we're talking about beans or some grains or maybe some meat replacers, dairy replacers. A lot of hands, almost all of the panelists. Well, almost, I think, more than half of all of you. And of those products, who ate something that came from the Netherlands? Was grown in the Netherlands. Of the plant-based protein. Actually also, so there were, actually quite a lot. That's good. Because what I found is that if you now look at the alternative dairy, let's say, part in the supermarket, I'm really happy to see a lot of options out there. You have oat milk, you have soy milk, you have rice milk, almond milk. But all of them don't come from the Netherlands. And I realized that if we really want to make this transition, then we should also make sure that Dutch farmers, also those dairy farmers, start growing things which we can consume here. Because otherwise something will happen which is already happening. The Dutch big agricultural bank, the Rabobank, said that Dutch consumers were drinking less milk. Less cow milk. I think that's a good thing. They also said that exports of dairy products increased. So all the let's say gain that we're gaining, all the profit that let's say the good things that are happening are offset by an increase of export from these dairy products to Asia, and in the meantime we're importing soy and other products to make these protein products. And why I like that landscape part of this is that I believe that landscape should reflect how we want to live. And that means that if we want to live in a more plant-based society, we should also see that outside. And I'll invite you once to the piece of land that I'm working on now. We have more than 30 varieties of beans. We had a lot of different grains which we're growing. Well, they're just coming up now, so I think it's wonderful. So you really see the landscape changing, and with it, I think, for me at least, it represents the vision where I would like the Netherlands to go to.
Okay, thank you so much, Fabian. Moving on to Emily, who's a researcher here at Wageningen, but also a mentee at Young Professionals for Agricultural Development. And Emily is the coordinator for United Community of African Students, and they have recently organized the Youth and Agricultural Conference.
Yeah. Thank
Welcome.
you. My name is Emily. I'm from Kenya. And in a nutshell, why I'm here is not only because I have the experience, which I'll briefly explain, but also I have a keen interest. I was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, but then for my bachelor's I studied agronomy. And as such, I've moved from the city to a more, we'd call it rural setup, such that here I am studying agriculture, and the expectation is I'm supposed to research and come up with solutions for farmers. But then who am I to speak if I've never been to a farm? So immediately after uni, my deliberate reactions was to work in extension education and rural advisory services. So I moved to different parts of rural Kenya where I worked with smallholder farmers. So in different value chains, in coconut, in French beans that we export to the Netherlands, in all these various smallholder farming systems. And like I mentioned, the main reason is I didn't want to be the person who sits, a lab code scientist, who creates knowledge and information that is not applicable to farmers. And I'm glad to say that in my experience, I also learned that, yes, farmers do have information. They live in their spaces, but then, because we're all together in this landscape, that's where co-learning comes in. Then how do we work together? How do we work with farmers? How do we transfer this knowledge? So transitioning for me from practice as an extension educator and to research in sustainable land management in Wageningen, it's quite interesting to see, like, most of the things farmers know or we do have names, but it's just a way of packaging them. And as a young person, most of the time we have challenges of people not taking your information seriously, and kudos to organizing this as young people, because this rarely happens. And this is like a very good step towards this. And we did the same during the One World Week. We had a conference on youth and agriculture. And the main idea is, as young people, we have the initiative, we have the drive, we have the innovation. We have the charisma to move forward and come up with solutions within our landscapes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Emily. Now we'll move on to Tyrion, who is the agroforestry business and project developer at the Renature Foundation. There on his top.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, indeed, that's my role is to develop projects and the business case for agroforestry projects that we at Renature do. The goal of Renature is to regenerate landscapes through commercially viable agroforestry. So we all know that commodity production is a hugely destructive force in the world. And it can be a positive force for sustainable landscapes, for landscapes that work for people, for biodiversity. But often the worlds of agroecology or even permaculture, which I have some background in, doesn't necessarily connect with the large-scale realities of agriculture. And so what we're trying to do is approach these large-scale problems of agriculture in a commercial way that also incorporates all of these things we so desperately need. So ecology, social justice, environmental justice, and food sovereignty, ways that people can define their own ways of living within a landscape, and also regenerating landscapes together. So that's what I try to do. Thinking about co-creation, it's a big challenge, and I'm very aware of the work that we do as Renature. We're a Dutch-based organization. We work all over the world, recently came back from Indonesia. How can we transfer important knowledge about agroforestry, which is not an easy practice, to people whose lives depend on the soil and on the crops that they grow, in a way that is going to work for these people? So co-creation for me is an incredibly important thing to incorporate in the way that we do our work. I think often creative processes of, for example, transitioning a farm to a different way of doing things are often very challenging. Educational organizations have existed for a very long time, and a lot of the time positive change doesn't happen in farming. That's because it's often a very top-down process where the people who are actually going to be doing the farming, doing the living of the farming on a daily basis for the rest of their lives are not actually brought into a process. So co-creation is trying to find a way that everybody has a legitimate say in a design process, in a process of change, even if there's an organization like Renature which comes to a place and wants to contribute to change. It has to be a process where there's a legitimate conversation between parties. We listened to a chainsaw cutting down a tree earlier, and I stood up because I thought that that is an important part of landscapes. My personal motivation for doing the work I do is because I grew up amongst the woods and the fields of Wales and southern England, and the emotional connection I have to landscapes is so important. I've done a lot of work in forestry, and I've cut down trees with a chainsaw, and sometimes my brother has had to come up to me. I work with my brother in the forests, and he comes up to me and he says, "You need to do it," because sometimes I stop doing my work because it's such an emotional thing to cut down a tree. But we have to find ways for us in the landscape to interact and do things like cutting down trees in a way that is sensitive to the overall interactions of the landscape. That's a really important challenge that I feel that we need to address. And that's what I hope that we can do through commercial agroforestry. That's why I'm so interested in what we're doing. It's a way of looking at landscapes as interactive, as complex, as diverse, but also serving various purposes. They're managed, semi-managed, as commercial farms, as community spaces. So that's the way that I approach landscapes, the way that I see co-creation, and the way that I hope process of change can go in the future. Understanding complexity, the need to manage, the need to be sensitive how we manage.
Thank you very much, Tyrian. Over to Malik, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion Wageningen. Please.
Yeah, I'm here because I'm frustrated. We've been born into a system which we had no control over and is actively destroying our future of living on a livable planet. I'm in Wageningen because I have a long-term goal of serving a high-ranking political position in my home country of South Africa, hopefully president. I am part of Extinction Rebellion because we have very little chance of achieving our climate goals. The 1.5 degree mark that was set by the IPCC, experts have told us that we have a 5% chance of reaching it, even if we enact the binding resolutions that have been proposed by people like AOC in the US and Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. What Extinction Rebellion does is it attempts to change the overtone window. The overtone window is basically the life cycle of a political idea. It sees what would be considered extreme position turn into something radical, then acceptable, and eventually embraced. An example could be Trump's Muslim ban, for example, which before him would have been seen as unthinkable. But then through his rhetoric and through the rise of global fascism became just radical. What Extinction Rebellion tries to do is it tries to set the tone for what radical environmentalism would look like. So disruptive actions before the Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future, Youth for Climate, Extinction Rebellion were seen as unthinkable. And now it's part and parcel of what the youth are doing. Yeah, in terms of how activism interacts with landscapes and co-creation. Activism sets the tone of what language we use to engage with nature. For example, the overriding narrative now with how we see nature and how we deal with nature falls under the unifying language that the UN sets of ecosystem services. It's a simplification, and it ignores different perspectives of how other people would value nature. And it's been largely very unhealthy. Nature is not just there as a service provider for us. It is a co-creator with us. And what Extinction Rebellion tries to do is it tries to challenge that narrative. We need to see nature as being more than just a service provider. Yeah.
Thank you, Malik, for that. Over to Fons, who is a board member of Klimaat- en Energiekuppel, yeah? And KNCV, I'll let you pronounce
which is
that.
the Koninklijke Nederlandse Chemievereniging. Is it okay if I stand up? Otherwise we sit the full afternoon. So my name is Fons. I'm a master's student here doing biotechnology, so I'm looking at the very microscopic things and the models. But at the same time, I'm also taking a day off every Friday to work on climate affairs. Last January, I was inspired by all the youth that were going on the streets, and the students in Wageningen, they don't go to Amsterdam to protest. So I thought, hey, let's collaborate with a lot of young professionals in the Netherlands to make a change in our landscape. Because we've got a major opportunity this year, because we are making the Dutch climate agreement, which needs to be sent to the European Union, so that the European Union can have a strong voice in the international climate negotiations. And we, as young professionals, because I'm representing a lot of chemists on universities, on applied universities, but also young professionals up to 35 years, that we bring in all the green career tigers to bring them together to think about how we, as the young generation, which actually has to do all these challenges in energy, mobility, agriculture, all these different dimensions, they have come together in this climate agreement. And we are the generation that actually is going to do this in the next 20, 30 years. And they are making plans, and we think, hey, what if we could talk with them, be like the 12th person on this negotiation table, and ask the referee what kind of game we can play in order to change the game of soccer on climate policy. So, yeah, I would like to discuss more about how we can interact with that and find new opportunities where we can put visionaries, but also new entrepreneurs, but also bridging classical NGOs with corporates to see how we can actually do it. And I'm quite positive about what I'm seeing here in the Netherlands compared to what is still being global. But I believe that this place in Wageningen is special, that we can make a nice message and also a form of action towards the other places in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Fons. On to Louisa, who is a board member and project leader of Otherwise.
Yes. I've been involved in Otherwise for almost 4 years now, and it's really my home. And what is Otherwise about? Otherwise, for me, is about really questioning things deeply, things that we take for granted. I think all of us, we just live our lives, we get up in the morning, we do our things, but a lot of things that we do actually don't make sense at all, if you think about it, right? Why do we eat the stuff that we eat that is actually very destructive to our landscapes? Why do we not even know often what our brothers or sisters are really doing? Why don't we know our family intimately? Why don't we question what we learn? Why don't we question that we have to sit into buildings for over 20 years of our lives, while real life is really happening somewhere else? And, and this is what really drives me. And I think it's really important that we start questioning things more, and that we start questioning more deeply what kind of structures or what is really forming our society. Because when I look at climate change, for me it's really a problem of, it's a pattern. It's a pattern that we've been into for a really long time, a pattern that people keep repeating, which is just a pattern of separation, disconnecting, dominating landscapes, dominating each other, controlling things. And you can see that in so many things that we're doing. And I think that's how deep the change has to go, if we really want to change something. I like to quote Einstein, you can't solve problems with the same way of thinking that created them. And I'm afraid we really have to go in a different way, and that's hard. And how are we going to find out? How are we going to do this? And we need some more disrupting dialogue, I think, to really get to the bottom of things and really get honest about what we're doing and where we're going. And I think somehow climate change is also kind of a nice joke of the world, because it forces us to connect, because we're all in it. You can't go anywhere, you can't escape, you're all in it. So we'll have to deal with each other, and we'll have to deal with it. And landscape approaches, I think similarly, they help us to connect, because inside landscapes a lot of things come together that are normally treated separately in our education, like business, economics, nature, whatever. But in a landscape, it's all happening together. It's all the same thing. And I like this idea of the composition, because it's about collaboration. It's about, you have a nice music, you have a nice composition if all the parts fit together nicely. And this is what nature does when it functions in a stable way. This is my point. And youth, I think youth are really important, because young people are free. We're free. We're not in the structures yet that are ruling a lot of people's lives. You get into a dependency when you get older, because you have to earn your money. So you have to comply to a lot of structures, a lot of things that actually don't really make sense. But so young people are still free. So use your freedom and speak out. And we're innocent. We can say anything because we're young and stupid anyway. But you can say anything. And you can say what other people can't say anymore, because they will lose their position or they will lose something by it. And we're free to fail, right? Same. We're young, we're silly, we don't know. So you're free. You're free to try. You're free to fail. Use your freedom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was great. Anam, we'll wrap up with you for the 5-minute pitches. You are the founder of Shimei, I hope I pronounced that right, Eco Gardens, which is a Kenyan-based environmental company in the agribusiness.
Yes. So I'm Anam, and about 2 years ago, I finished my bachelor, went back to Kenya, where it's home for me, and was completely lost. Like, what am I going to do with my life, with the knowledge I've acquired? And my dad had a fish pond in the garden. And so I came back with all my knowledge, knowing the cycles of just the environment and using water as a sustaining and nutrient source for plant production. And I went up to my dad and told him, what are you doing with this water? How comes you're not using it for any other sources? And I think this relates to your point of view. My dad didn't understand these interactions and these new sorts of knowledge that we've come to acquire. And so he basically told me, you know what? Here's some money. Build your aquaponics, whatever it's called, and show me, through action and really just practical, reality, what this is. And so that's how I started. 2 years ago, I built my own aquaponics system, and from there, I just realized, hey, this is something I can do and help other people do. So when I look at this whole climate change and landscape, I think my role and many of us here is to increase this carrying capacity within the landscape. Making sure these landscapes are adaptive to the changes that are going to come, whether it is us controlling it, which I don't personally feel is a bad thing. I think it's also positive to control a landscape just for the benefit of it, but also to help it cope and build the resilience it needs. And so when I look at climate and our role, it's about creating these interactions between the components in the components within the landscape. Whether it's social characteristics, environmental characteristics, it's just about creating these synergies within the landscapes and giving them their capacity to fulfill their ecosystem functions for people to reach food nutrition, food sovereignty, and also income end of the day. You know, I kind of have a different background, whereas I'm more entrepreneurial, you know, so I still revolve around the concept of money. And, you know, this plays a huge role when you're trying to change these landscapes and create this adaptive capacity that we're all looking for. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anam. So now you guys all know what our panelists are all about. And nice, we're a little bit early, which is amazing. Maybe this is also a youth thing. We're on time these days. I don't know. But so how we're going to structure the discussion from here on is we're breaking it up into 3 parts. So we're going to discuss practice-based approaches first, then research, and then we're going to look at activism. And I have some specific questions for each of you. And if you guys feel the need that you want to really jump in, you know, contradict or add to or complement, yes. Please do so. Just stay behind the globes. Yeah? Yeah, just stay in this space. So we're going to start off with practice-based approaches. I'm sure you guys have now started to put everyone in, let's call them boxes, which is what I've done hypocritically. So I've said that, yes, Anam is practice-based, and Tyrion is practice-based, and Fabian is practice-based. And then they all turned around and they were like, whoa, wait, you know, I don't want to be in this silo. And that was a mistake that I made, that it was completely hypocritical. We're talking about co-creating, we're talking about doing things together, and here I've gone and put you all in silos. So I'd like to retract that and make sure that we really get a bit, you know, more of a divergent discussion on our little silos, because that's why we're here. We're here together. So let's start off with Anam. I know you did just finish, but so what was interesting in the Renew and Common Land workshop was this idea of multifunctional landscapes. Now, you were talking about increasing carrying capacity and taking advantage of synergies. Now, synergies in multifunctional landscapes, I imagine, would happen, but I can also envisage conflicts. So what are the challenges associated then with being synergistic in landscapes, especially when they are multifunctional and you might have different objectives?
Yeah, I think for me, it's more about understanding the context, you know, and if I can just take examples from the work I do, I worked from both urban spaces to rural spaces and everything in between that. Mm-hmm. And one answer for a rural context and one answer for an urban context isn't the same. And so you really have to first assess the landscape you're in and really understand the interactions that's happening. And not all synergies will always be there. So I think it's, really focusing on the important ones that carry the landscape, but also can bring forth something more for the environment to be more resilient for itself.
Okay. Yeah. Now, your company or also your work is Kenyan-based. So maybe could you give us, because you're talking about context, so what is then the Kenyan context that you work in, and what does that contribute to it? Yeah,
it's interesting because it's also something I noticed when studying here in Wageningen, which I don't look at it as a bad thing, but a lot of the cases in courses and in the work we do, we always focus on small-scale farmers, you know, which I think is important. But in my context, I focus on everyone, whether you're small-scale, urban living, you know, residential homes, large-scale farming, because everyone has their challenges and their vulnerabilities. And I think it's about creating this capacity for all of them to reach that level for which they can achieve their goals, as well for the landscape to achieve their goals. So when looking at that, it's more about, you know, what role does that certain context play for them, but also what does that play for the surrounding environment and also the global environment as well. Because as we said, we are co-creators and everything we do has a domino effect of some sort where we also have to look at critically. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that influence then in all aspects along that spectrum that you're talking about. So not just context geographically, but also
I think socially, environmentally, culturally, there are whole different dynamics and dimensions that are ever evolving. And so we always have to really just take a minute, analyze them. And, you know, again, when you were saying about these boxes, you know, like I'm just no practice. I had to research these environments first. You know, I took 6 months to really just understand the Kenyan market. You know, where can I buy these goods? Whether it's polythene, whether it's bamboo, whether it's metal, how do I transport these things from this place to an urban context? For that, that's simple. You know, there's infrastructure there. Whereas now, if I work in a rural context, you know, when it's isolated, how do I now break down these barriers to reach the final goal that I want, but also the landscape wants? Yeah.
So maybe we can jump across the world to Tyrion, because the regenerative agroforestry that you do is predominantly in the tropics, am I?
Predominantly, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe you could...
but predominantly.
Okay, maybe you could give us some context then from your experience there.
It's some context.
Yes, as to... So why is the place so important then in the tropics, and how does that relate to how you go about implementing the agroforestry systems?
Yeah, well, context is completely king. One of the things we learn about conventional agriculture is typically that it's very formatted. You repeat a pattern, and it doesn't matter where you are. You just do the same thing everywhere because there's a formula to doing things. Context is absolutely vital. Yeah, for example, our recent project in Indonesia, it has a very specific context. There are certain things available in terms of plant materials, in terms of, let's say, compost for setting up a system, or biomass, or seeds, or tools. You're working with certain people who have certain capacities to do things, who have certain will to do things, cultural context and economic context, political context, all of which define the possibilities of what you can do in a certain place. You can have the best ideas in the world about what should be in the place, but if you're not working with what is there and the functionality of the system as it is now, then you're not going to succeed in achieving what you want to achieve. Yeah, I think farmers tend to understand the need to know their land, and this is very important when you're talking about landscape degradation. You have to know the land in order to be able to do anything useful. I think it's a little bit naive to assume you can't work with context.
Yeah. So maybe on naivety, that's an interesting point, because you were talking about large-scale approaches. Now, when I think of large-scale and I think of the tropics, I think of monocrops. I think of dominance. I think of a landscape that is, you know, dominated by these power relations that are maybe questionable. So have you experienced that you know, the landscapes that are dominated by monocultures, that are associated with environmental degradation, with social inequalities? So how do you overcome that so that you guys can actually implement large-scale agroforestry systems?
You have to think about what a certain way of farming means for a person doing it. If you want to do something at a large scale, you have to think about the functionality of that scale. And large scale doesn't necessarily mean that there is one organization orchestrating everything at that scale. When we work with large scale solutions, we try to work across let's say, a commodity rather than a single farm. We might start with working with a farmer who's working on a single hectare, but the scale comes when those systems and ways of thinking about farming in that place that we support are then taken on and embraced by other people in the area and adapted by other people in the area. So the scalable solution is not something which is just one big thing. It's, let's say you want to grow pepper in an agroforestry system, white pepper in an agroforestry system. You need to give enough flexibility so that people can take it on and adapt the things that you bring into their own context. And that's when you're hitting large-scale change, because people can start doing things in their own way, but it also plays into the things that you've brought into that system as well.
Yeah, so I guess your role then is to sort of generate these spillover effects in the areas that you're working in and showcasing examples of, okay, this is a way of doing it, so this is, and then you're in the hope that people pick it up and propagate that idea through the practice.
Yeah, exactly, and people have to pick it up for themselves because they're the ones who are going to do it. And they're the ones who know their context best. So you're not even necessarily talking about very specific practices, you're talking about processes.
Yeah.
So let's say a different way of treating your soil. And then if people understand the processes, then they can introduce the practices that work for them, which work with those processes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can go, thank you, Tyrion, go around the world a bit more and come over to the Netherlands, and I'll ask you to speak up a little bit so the audience can hear us. So, Fabio, my question to you is, and I think you've kind of answered it, but why Europe and why the Netherlands? And please relate that to climate change for us.
I think mainly because if you think something should happen, the best person to do it is yourself. I think there's a nice proverb for that. I forgot it. The moment I realized I really wanted to work in the Netherlands was when I was writing a report on Malawi, here for my previous job as a researcher, on the climate resilience of their agriculture. And there was a big project going on. It was worth millions. And they wanted to know if they want to know on which crop they should focus. And if you, and basically that was the question I had to answer, or I had to help, give the literature so they could answer that question. I've never been in Malawi. And I don't know, I mean, I know there are a lot of statistics, so that's what I did, you know. But how can I tell what they should, be growing? And the answer you get is, of course, sorghum or corn, because that's what they're most. That's because the FAO says that's what they depend on, right? But it's such a strange thing to answer that question from here. I think so. I quit my job. That was one of the reasons.
Kudos.
And I mean, from their perspective, it's logical that all these systems, emerge as they do, but it didn't make me happy. So that's why I thought, okay, I want to work with farmers who I can actually talk to, and who I can, be sensitive to the reality there. That's why the Netherlands.
Yeah, interesting. And I think Emily sort of reiterated the same idea when she said, who am I to represent or speak on behalf of farmers? Which is why you went and you engaged with farmers. And Emily highlighted that there is a link between practice and research that, we need to acknowledge. And I think your experience is exactly that link from practice to research. So in light of that, then how does one actually engage and involve farmers in both practice and in research?
Yeah, I'll answer these questions first. I'll interject on what both of them said.
Ah, yes, great.
Slightly, and also answer to what you said. My experience has predominantly been with smallholder farmers, small-scale farmers, yeah. And if you think about research, we sit in classes, we read books, we read literature, we know this is sorghum, it does best in these temperatures, in these conditions, in these types of soils, it requires this amount of water. That's knowledge that's extremely valuable. And by sitting in that desk and being able to get this information and suggesting it to farmers is well in. It's not a bad thing. I'll tell you now it's not a bad thing. Because then the difference is as you go to the farmers and transfer this information, then you learn. You'll find these farmers have been growing this sorghum for so many years. You'll find these farmers have been growing this millet for so many years. But then it's evolving. Diseases are coming up. Climate change is making things, it's sort of destroying these dynamics. You as the person who's more knowledgeable is meant to come in with this information and help farmers improve on their current state. But the difference is to not tell, but to work together. So yes, all these organizations, and there's funding and there's money, they are informed and they do work with local governments. The only main critique I'd have is the same thing you have, is that it's very abstract. It's when do we involve what is happening on the ground and then sort of synergize. such that if I have this new variety of sorghum which we develop in all these research centers, how do I then tell these farmers, yes, this will work best? And how do we practice it? And how do I involve these smallholders farmers? And how do we test it? How do we do these pilots without destroying this space as it was? It is challenging. It's extremely challenging. Change doesn't happen once. No one likes change. No one accepts change immediately. But then the good thing is if you're introspective, like what you said, that's already a step in itself. Yeah, and to think about, if you think about the tropics and the smallholder farmer, there is focus on the smallholder farmer because how many large-scale farmers are there? And what is large scale? How many acres is large scale? What's the Kenyan context? What's the Tanzanian context? What's the Malawian context? What's the Indonesian context? So it's thinking about these different contexts, and to that much I agree, and realizing there is focus on the smallholder farmers, but there's also reason. Because that's where it starts. That's where most of the food produced globally comes from. The problem is, yes, it's fragmented. It's all these challenges, it's finance, it's skill, it's capacities. But we cannot completely, I think it will be a bit of an injustice to completely push it aside and say there's too much focus. There still needs to be focus, and I think there still needs to be a lot of focus. And in terms of bridging research and practice, it's just, I'll speak from a personal point of view is, yes, I went into practice. It's nice that I saw, because I started from behind. Unlike you, I practiced and then I came back into research. But then it's questioning. It's finding out what needs to happen. Does it work? Does it not work? And I think that in itself is just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's interesting. If maybe, I don't know if anyone else has any other interjections. Does anyone want to comment? No, but so I like the point of, okay, smallholder farmers, and there is this push, yes, especially in science, okay, large scale, they have the largest impact, so let's focus on that. But like you're right, saying that we need to also focus on the smallholder farmers. So then, do you think that, for instance, aquaponics or hydroponics system could be a solution then for smallholder farmers? So how can we envisage this this transition then for smallholder farmers to be more?
For sure, I still personally agree that there needs to be a huge focus on small-scale farmers, because I think within the whole agricultural industry there isn't, in terms of just subsidized for fertilizer and inputs and whatever needs that they need. I think when we look at aquaponics, there's also a difference in low cost, medium cost, and high cost. And there's different ways we can, and this is what I said when analyzing the environment. There's different ways of combating these barriers through different strategies. I can give you another example from my work, and what I was trying to propose for a project is that you see in Lake Victoria that the livelihood and lifestyle of most men there are fishermen. And now over the years you've seen a huge problem in environmental consequences, whether it's overfishing or releasing the sewage or chemicals into the lake, which has increased the hyacinths in the lake and decreased the oxygen for the fish to survive. And I look at aquaponics as a solution to solving not only their livelihood, but also the environmental consequences of what's going on. And by creating a low-cost, interactive network aquaponics program, you could not only solve those environmental issues, but provide them two goods, diversify their income in terms of them growing fish, but also having some veggie fruit produce on the side, which, when we're talking about the SDGs, helps food nutrition, stable income security, and yeah, it brings forth a new sort of landscape for them to really emerge and immerse themselves in it. And yeah, that's where I see the role of really analyzing these environments and bringing these technologies into play. whether it's low cost or high cost. But I think everyone has the field to do so, you know, whatever their capacity. But yeah, it's about bringing these capacities higher for them.
And yeah, so technology then in your case is an example where you can do that, and even within the spectrum of, you know, low cost to high cost, because very often technology as a solution for the agricultural system is associated with mechanization, is associated with high costs, and that's not the case in your case. And so I'd like to just state that if we have any questions from the GLF community, that, you know, we can introduce them here. And we have a little bit of time, so I was wondering if anyone in the audience has a question related to the role of practice-based approaches then for this co-creation of climate-smart knowledge that they would like to address to the panelists. No? No question? Yes? Ah, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm actually very curious if anyone of you knows what farmers actually need to make the transition to regenerative agriculture. Is there anything general to say about that?
Okay, so what farmers need, the conditions that they need for regenerative agriculture?
Yeah,
yes?
Climate, knowledge.
Okay, what's the most important thing? Tyrion, maybe, yes?
Both finance and knowledge. If you're working as a farmer or in any job, your daily routines are the things that allow you to keep having a living, and it's not often that you have a surplus of resources that come out of those daily routines, so it then becomes very difficult to get out of those daily routines. So having, for example, some financial support to be able to fill the gap as you make a transition is incredibly important. But regenerative agriculture is not something which is just a solution that you can just slap down and you don't have to think about it. It's normally a more complex way of thinking about the interactions of a landscape, of a farm. So you really need knowledge. In many contexts, you find that people have an immense amount of knowledge, but maybe they need the structure, the infrastructures to be able to apply that knowledge, or a contextual understanding of where they're going in order to bring in their unique knowledge. Yeah, my answer is that you need both, essentially, together.
You need both. And then maybe is the tone set, so directing a landscape when it comes to regenerative agriculture, specifically for then climate smart, is that a hindrance to you? Do you feel that it is a challenge to have to sort of, you know, conform to what is being highlighted by the UN IPCC or conforming to targets? Is that, or is, you know, the climate change narrative actually an ideal maybe pathway for regenerative agriculture?
I don't know if anybody else had something to add, if you want. I think it can be a very useful framework for driving regenerative agriculture. If targets and structures allow for resources and knowledge to come into regenerative agriculture, normally you find that a climate smart solution is also a very smart solution for many other things in regenerative agriculture. So pure targets, they're not useful, but having the structures that come from those targets and the goals and the ability to then do something on the basis of those targets or on the basis of those structures is very useful.
Yeah.
It's very useful. I just don't believe in dogma.
Yeah, so multifunctional, multiple objectives, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I would like to relate to that because we were talking about discussion about smallholder or large-scale agriculture, and I think it's not so important on who you focus, but whether the solution is scalable or not. And because I think that, for example, one of the programs I thought were really useful at the research program I worked with were climate smart villages. So villages who had proven that there were some people who were ready to be innovative, etc. And they were given money and knowledge so that they had some time and more time than usual, or some resources to actually innovate things that they wanted to do themselves already. And whether the driver was climate change Of course, they started doing, you know, making fruit juice from their fruits, or you know, trying out different varieties themselves because they were finally, they had time and resources to do this. And whether this was only one village, obviously you didn't stay in that village. People would come there, would see, and would learn from each other. So I think, again, to go back to this discussion, small scale or large scale, I think that's not so important. What's important is whether it's scalable.
Whether it's scalable. So is that something then, Fons, that is considered in your work, because you work a lot with policy?
Yes, what we see, for instance, in agriculture, like my dad, he is an egg producer in the south of the Netherlands. It's called Gijsei, which is quite similar to Kipster. Maybe you've heard about that initiative. And it's really about relative. Like if you have 40,000 chickens, I say my dad is a medium-scale farmer, because in the Netherlands you also have got 100,000 chickens. And yesterday in the news, Ukraine builds barns of 1 million chickens funded by the European Union, partly with subsidies. But if you regard 40,000 chickens with food, my dad started with soy from South America, but he wanted to do something differently. And he talked with the Animal Protection Agency and the Friends of the Earth Alliance. And they said, hey, what about if we can replace soy with a food variety in the region of 100 kilometers, which I think 100 kilometers is still quite regional. And it worked, and now he has a special contract with the supermarket, and now he can sell all his eggs with a premium price to the supermarket with a huge marketing effect, because people know that this farmer is attached to this egg. And it shows that, that it can be with a small pilot, and I'm discussing with my dad, how can you expand this? Because it's not about building new farms, it's about how do you transform our current poultry horticulture. Because we've got some, talking about landscapes, you've got the Bible Belt right here in Wageningen, but below it in Brabant and Limburg, you've got the protein belt, because so many farmers are actually engaged in making proteins, which are animal derived, but in a complete new way. And that saves majorly within transportation emissions if you use your food, your plant protein from local sources.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I see that back in the climate agreement, right now it's more focused on greenhouses, because we already have got heat pumps in some of the greenhouses, because the west of the Netherlands, I think if I hear your stories from outside Europe, it feels like, like a lot of trees with farms, but here it's a lot urbanized. So if I go to the west, it's like glass houses and cities, and glass houses and cities. And there they have really now the next move, how can we really not only have heat pumps, but still CO2 in the greenhouses, maybe not with methane, by burning methane, which is also nice for the cold winters, but also by geothermal energy. So it's really context dependent indeed how you imply these kind of innovations within the policy framework. And what we actually do with all the young professionals is we have 500 ambassadors, and they came up with all these new things that happens here, but also outside the Netherlands. And we just compile them, show the new stories to policymakers, and they are always looking for something new, what can be applied. So that's why they really worship us, because they hear the new stories from the new guys.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting, because when we had the workshop with Milieu de FNC, the Dutch Friends of the Earth, we sort of reflected on this need to have internal and external reflexivity. And so externally we said, okay, in order to be reflexive externally, we could propose a form of systemic change. And to me, this sounds like that is systemic change. But I think, Louisa, your tone with that we have no control over the system, and that that there is this dominance. Do you think then that systemic change is enough for climate change?
Well, what else can we do?
I don't know.
But yes, I think we need a systemic change, but I think it goes beyond implementing new innovations and finding new technologies. And I don't know, for me it's also much more simple it's also about, I don't know, what I hear like in the stories of things that worked out, for example, with your father, I think, well, the reason why it worked is because at some point he got supported by supermarkets who wanted to make it work. So I think support is a very important element. It's the same, it's the space or the finance that you need to make a change. Depends on the support of people who allow you that room. So, like, and I really like the concept of the CSA, the community-supported agriculture. It's literally community-supported agriculture. So we're in this together. We make a system in which we support a farmer to provide us something. If it fails, then we're all included into the problem and into the solution, maybe as well. Because the knowledge that you need would come from also this community that is involved. And what I hear, I don't know, when we talk about how the policy sort of level works, I mean, most people are really not involved into the discussions. Ooh. Like most of us, we're not involved, actually. We're not involved in changing anything.
That's why we've got to build a platform with 500 ambassadors. So if you actually not study, but also really work in the Netherlands on energy, mobility, housing, industry, we as youth, we should build more of these platforms that innovators can talk. And maybe indeed with innovation, like what I see, our generation already has this mentality about the SDGs, about climate action, and all the innovations that they bring, they also bring that with a story that has different values. And what we do is offer that platform, but it really depends indeed on the support. And what I see in the Netherlands is that our policy framework is quite open. There are still happening things behind the door, but to get a few places from the door, it's quite easy to go there. And once you're there and you organize yourself effectively, like I'm spending now every Friday on climate affairs. Ruud Koonstra, who is mainly busy with the energy transition, he calls himself the energy commissioner of the Netherlands, not the minister, but he just puts himself a title and he dedicates time in it. That makes a change in the public opinion and also how to engage people.
Mm. So on that note of...
No, but it's still happening at a scale which is beyond still most people. And a lot of people don't even have the level of education or the words or the language or the time to engage, at the level where you are. And I still think in other more simple ways, everybody should be included. So instead of, we can at a very local level in the way that we manage our green spaces. People can interact as a community, people can take care, people can make... Whole of Wageningen could be one big food forest if we wanted. We could. Like every town could be one big food forest if we wanted, with chickens, with pigs, that recycle our leftover scraps and food. And I think this is way more important to have, because then people are actively engaged again with life and what are we doing, how do we make our space. Now we're just little people moving in the space, but we're never part of creating it. We're not the same with education. We just follow our education, but we're not part of actually making our education. Well, I spent a quarter of my life in it, and I don't have a say in what I'm doing. I mean, that's super weird. So I like to think more in the small, in the direct, like here environment. Yeah.
Okay, so I see that you have two perspectives. So this is, I was talking about internal and being externally reflexive. So Louisa is saying from within, we need to, start making the changes right here. You need to start having, your behavioral changes in your day-to-day lives. And Fons is saying that you can actually be involved, cross-sectoral collaboration with the businesses, and I guess you could argue that that's more of a top-down. So maybe could we not find the middle ground and say that if you're saying we need both, then maybe there's a way of bridging that gap. So, how can we narrow the grassroots or the bottom-up gap and the top-down gap? And I think I'd like to turn to Malik, because we had a discussion about the tone that activism sets, and then the action that it inspires. So could you relate that maybe to the discussion that Fons and Louisa had?
Yeah, if I can just start by asking the crowd a question. How many of you see overpopulation as one of the largest threats that promote climate change? and the effects that it will have after. Right. So if I can just contextualize this discussion a little bit. When we talk about all these things that we're doing, and it's wonderful initiatives that everyone's part of, I feel like we sometimes don't address the problems that we can identify. So we've come up with solutions, but we're not agreeing on what the major problems are. And I always like to think of it as if you witness a car accident and someone's bleeding to death on the ground, what's the first thing you do is you stop the bleeding before anything else. When it comes to this, I think positionality becomes very important in Western countries like Holland. We eat too much, we buy too much, and we waste too much. I mean, if 10% of the world's wealth is responsible for 50% of lifestyle waste and emissions, we need to contextualize that. We need to say, what's happening right here? How do we address what's happening right here before we look at how we can improve other parts of the world? That's why I really respect what you do. Another point is that when it comes to activism, you know, we've seen the carbon major reports that said 100 companies are responsible for 70% of the global emissions. A lot of those companies are identifiable by name, but we're too scared to call them out.
Do you know how many people rely on those companies?
Of course, but
it's not only about those companies, it's really the chain of all the people that are dependent on it. For instance, I work in industry. This year I work on aviation. I think aviation is the most classical topic on that. But I cannot blame KLM that they should give me now an electrical flight if I need to go to Indonesia to do reforestry.
Of course. What I'm saying is that to an extent we need to break that thinking. We need to say, you know what, we've brought ourselves to a man-made extinction event. The recent report that came out, 1 million species at risk of extinction within the next decade. We are reliant on those systems.
Yes.
For you to say so many people are reliant on these companies which are actively propagating these systems, we're making two perfectly timed shots from two different courts. We're talking about different things. We need to contextualize it by saying the problems are identifiable by name, by country. We can't see them. We need to call them out for it because otherwise we just won't have a hope of doing anything about it.
So I think, because we have a question from Andrew, somewhere, wherever you may be, Andrew. And Andrew asked, how do we know our intuition as youth is a good intuition and that we will not make the same mistakes again? And I think that relates nicely to what you were saying.
Good question. Well, I think the best way to look at it is what's been done before. We've been born into the system which we had no control over, which is actively decimating the potential of living on a livable planet. We know that the system is to blame for that. What we are doing is actively challenging the very system that brought us to this man-made extinction event. And I mean, I can cite 100 reports that show like what the root causes of this problem are. And it all comes down to, and we have to mention by name, the capitalist exploitative economic system that we live in. What the Fridays for Future marches do, what Greta Thunberg is calling out, is exactly that. It's challenging capitalism. It's getting these wealthy business owners to account for the pollution that they have brought on us without our consent. We are living in a system where we are completely dependent on them. So we have no choice to live alternatively. If you live in the city, for example, you can't go to a farm and practice agroforestry, for example. You have to abide by those laws. So what the youth is doing and why I'm so sure that they're right is because they're challenging the very system that brought us here.
Okay. Yeah, well, do you associate that, or maybe someone else can comment on, are there any sacrifices then? You know, can we name, because we're talking about how we frame the problem is obviously how we're going to propose the solutions. So then if we're framing the problem as we need system change, because the system is a problem, then do we have to sort of, are there any sacrifices along the way for us? Because if this is something we are going to do, I personally would like to be aware of them. So can anyone comment maybe on what, Louisa?
Well, is it a sacrifice or is it your present to the future?
Yeah.
And I think that makes a big difference in how you experience it. Because if you really think about it, if you right now do make right choices and if you do make a change, imagine how much that means for the future. I mean, if you really think about it, yeah. If you can really make a change, I mean, I wouldn't want to do anything. I mean, there's nothing I would like to do more. Right.
Yeah, no,
If
I'm allowed to put in my own opinion as maybe a side panelist, I couldn't agree with you more in that I am naively optimistic that we can be predominant drivers of change. So I agree that it's not a sacrifice. It is a present to the future generations. Yeah?
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. I love that idea, but I do disagree with it. What Extinction Rebellion is proposing and the systematic change that it's demanding will have disastrous effects, and I'm terrified of what it's going to look like. If you break the back of our economic system, it will have domino effects, and it will affect people who are already vulnerable. So, for example, if we go out and challenge Saudi oil companies, right? These are the OPEC nations. These are the ones who set the global price of oil. Farmers, from where I'm from where Emily is from, they're going to feel the effects of that because they're still dependent on fossil fuels. We are sacrificing a lot, but it's the only way we can do something about it. People will suffer because of it, because we're breaking the back of a well-established system. But it's necessary. We have to do it.
Okay, we have to do it, and it sounds like it's dystopian, the future. But I'm sure we can maybe sort of think of, from our experiences, think of mechanisms maybe that we can think of, from practice to research to activism, to maybe dampen these effects.
Yeah, if I want to bring it back more into this landscape approach, how you change this system. Right now in the Netherlands, we've got this regional energy strategy, which actually has started 2 months ago. Every citizen, you're also citizens because you have written yourself in Wageningen municipality, you can engage in the energy value of the food valley. And they are making big steps right now to not rely on gas, because in the Netherlands is a strange country. We still have some landscapes from Germany that bring in some coal for the last coal power plants, but they are going to shut off, and we then only rely on gas. But we have this social movement that we don't want to extract gas from the north, because that landscape doesn't like it, because it starts rumbling, it starts destroying the houses. And people are like, there is a political breakthrough in the Netherlands that we just completely switch from fossil resources to renewables on solar and mainly wind. And right now the discussions play about, hey, how can we co-create with the communities, where we put the windmills, where we put the solar panels, and where we can make also demand changes, because you need to have some batteries, you need to have some savings, you maybe need to consume less because the prices become more flexible. But I disagree with just washing away all this market way, because markets are also doing good things, because they automate how these stakeholders interact. If my government would say, hey, I only want to go for fully hydrogen because we like windmills and we like water, as our history does in the Netherlands, I think that's a bad idea, because we need a lot of these policy mixtures in order to find solutions, just like CCS. It's the storage of carbon under the ground, which is hugely controversial in my green friends' circles. But if I look at the policy papers with it, and also just having realism in it, I think we should just make a good plan, a democratic plan, how we as a society want to stop the emissions right now for our products. But I personally believe we cannot change our factories because we still need to use some materials, and our grandchildren also will need to use materials. And there are ways how to change or to renovate these factories. Also, oil refineries can be based on biomass. These biomass we currently bring in from North America. We heard this trees coming down, but actually we have some forests also for the productive area. And these things are also all interlinked. But I really believe that we can not have this apocalyptic story, but really having to say about, hey, what about your country? Is your country making an integral climate strategy in all these different sectors? And maybe then work still in pillars, but you are the guys that have this open network. We are good on Facebook and Instagram, and we can easily make the bridges in order to help each other out. And that's my philosophy, how we can change it by actually doing it.
Okay, does anyone want to comment on that?
For me, I just see this as a debate or conflict between locality and sustainable globalization. And I think when looking at both these aspects, we have to take accountability into account for both aspects, whether it's these markets, these industries that we need, but also as an individual. I think from both sides there is accountability that needs to be brought to the front. And we talked about overpopulation, and we have many of us who've now taken vegetarianism as an option, but humans are the number one cause. Are we going to take that accountability and not have kids? These are things we also need to bring forward and really talk about, whether we're looking at the individual scale, but also at the market and industry scale. And I just wanted to bring that across for anyone else in the panel to talk about.
I have to let that point sink in, because indeed I'm a vegan, but not having children feels like a bigger thing. But I wanted to react on the discussion about the sacrifice or present. I think what Fons said is that indeed we need to co-create, basically, and maybe that's what makes it the difference from either a sacrifice or a present to the future. And and that's, I think, the big problem, maybe the biggest problem, that we are not talking together. And I personally do think that KLM is responsible for not having a more sustainable way of bringing us to Indonesia. But they are co-responsible. So and of course all airlines should get together and say, okay, we're going to make this plan. And then if KLM, because within the airlines they're doing a great job, do something, then it might be less of a sacrifice and more of a present they do to the whole community of airlines and to us, let's say. So to me, I think the co-creation is as vague as it sounds. So just getting together and agreeing, that's what it comes down to. Hey, okay, we have a problem, let's take our responsibility and let's solve it. I think that's number one thing to do.
Okay, so take on our responsibility then. We're talking about accountability, so this then makes me think about including people. And one of the outputs from the workshops on alternative research methodologies was this need to democratize science. And in it, they reflected that you need empathy and you need equity in science, and you need to decentralize the power in science. And I'd like to shed some light again back on research, because we're here as researchers. And maybe, Louisa, you could enlighten us on why are alternative research methods then so powerful?
I think, science is in principle, it's fine. It tries to figure things out, and it has quite a clear method on how to do it. But the method The problem with it, I think, is that the method is only a method. And with a certain method, you get a certain kind of information. And you structure your facts in a certain way, and you create a certain image. And the problem is when you make that the only one, or you make that the main one, and the truth. And I think that's happening too much right now in science, that it's just because it's
Which type of science? Personally,
Yeah.
as a chemist, I know that they were doing alchemistry, which was a different type of chemistry, but that was not worshipped in history, eventually. Old chemistry, making gold from all types of materials, that it was a different way of doing science, but that was not accepted eventually. Or what kind of science are you aiming at?
Well,
Because I don't see scientific community as one community. I see a lot of different types.
It's true. There's a lot of, there are. But still, I would say in science, for example, I think a main problem that often different worldviews are not accepted as valid. So if you would go, for example, go and study land use practices somewhere in Brazil, then people will have a very different view on what a landscape is and what the elements or forces in a landscape are that shape it and that you have to take into consideration. And yeah, I think these are often not really taken seriously. And this is only one example, but I think I think science has worked very well to understand a lot of things, but it also has come with a little bit of arrogance that then this is the right way. And of course, I mean, I cannot go into detail now about every kind of discipline and every kind of thing. I'm just trying to describe a general trend. And I think this is, countering this trend. There are people who claim that there should be different methods, that try to structure it differently or try to capture things differently or show a different view, a different world.
But you don't see it happen. Well, what I see at Wageningen University is you have citizen science coming in. You've got science which is paid by crowdfunding. I'm following research of new pollinators, and I get a new newsletter. I think this new way of doing science to engage the public and let them think with it and sharing it on social media. Like, I'm doing growing modeling stuff. Like, if I make a screenshot of my computer and send it to my friends, they say they don't want to see it. But if you're doing social sciences and you engage farmers, how you want to do a new way of landscape production and to integrate, for instance, meat production with local protein production, I think these things are easily at hand and are currently happening. What I see in my chemistry community, I see a lot of new initiatives of young scientists telling what they're doing and how eventually, even though it's very fundamental, it has a lot of new potentials that they show to the public why it's valuable.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's happening more and more, but it's still not mainstream. And in fact, I think if you do here a degree, you would probably, when you do a thesis, you will probably just pick a very mainstream method that you can finish within 6 months, and that is clear, and that your tutor also knows about how to do, whereas there could be a million different methods, but you'll probably not be introduced to them. It's something we work on with otherwise as well. And what I heard, I went to a few conferences the last year, and what I heard from the scientists speaking there is that they have immense issues collaborating with each other, even understanding, even though their fields are not that different, they just work on a slightly different level on crop diversity research or something. And they have really trouble to understand each other, to even have a conversation or try to find a collaborative research project. And I think it shows that it's too tight. The way of organizing it is too tight, or the way that we are taught to think is too much in one direction. Otherwise, people would be able to have more cross-dialogue and more collaboration. And I hear this time and time and time again from researchers and from others. It's one of the main issues in science.
Emily, maybe you want to comment on that? Yes, I could feel you.
I have something to add on that. I do the Master International Land and Water Management, and the core of that master is integration. the core of that master is multidisciplinary. And it is true, if you just go back into the context of the landscape, is if you focus only on the biophysical, chances are your research will get stuck in that particular spot. If you focus purely on the socio-economical, then chances are your research will also not be accepted. So yes, as scientists, we need to be more aware, and we need to have a bit more reflection on whether the research that we apply is actually applicable. And whether we like it or not, I think we definitely have to be, to start working in integrated ways, which I agree with you. And either way, we are being pushed towards it. We have to work together. A climate scientist has to work with the agronomists, you have to work with the social scientists. Because at the end of the day, it's practitioners. If I come and I tell you to grow this variety, and I'm convinced it's a good variety, but then the farmer does not care or has no interest, then it's just a variety in your shelf or in your paper. Either way, right now, and as young people also, it's a great opportunity. Just going back on the debates, also going between Malik and you, it's like, yes, there's energy and we need to push, but also how do we package it? How do people listen? As young people, the risk we face all the time is not getting the seat at the table, quote unquote, because we have not packaged ourselves correctly. We have not come forward in terms of a certain group. And instead of getting to a point where we hit walls, we want to go through that wall. We don't want to hit these walls. We want to say that, yes, you're in trouble. Yes, you're not sacrificing, but you are giving in. So yeah, so I think it's as individuals, there also has to be a lot of thought and introspect into what we do.
Is there maybe a question from the audience?
Can you say something also?
Yes, of course. Yes, and then I saw your hand. Yeah. Yes, please, just project your voice.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So my point was when we were talking about not changing the entire system in terms of not disrupting it, but going within it and trying to bring the best out of everything that exists, even if it's an industry. And you are more likely have to disrupt the system, and of course it will lead to a lot of struggle and disasters.
So it'll lead to a lot of struggles and disasters, that's true. So what is the way out of this? Because as I see, the thing is you cannot really disrupt everything. Like you cannot close down an industry and say that this industry is down, so it's sustainable. So how are people going to live and get that resource that this industry is not getting? So what I see is we have to colonize the system, and a lot of people here have experienced colonize, like they come from Netherlands, England, Spain, they are all colonizers. So I think we have the experience. We should colonize the system. We cannot disrupt it. We have to be within the system, bring people together, even aviation industry or food industry, anything, even external stakeholders which are outside the supply chain. And you have to present your thoughts in a way that they feel attracted, because they have different notions about what we have. So you have to think from their perspective to attract them for a good cause and colonize their mind, but for a good cause, and they will feel good about it. So I think disrupting or shutting down Shell or any industries is not the solution. It's improving them, colonizing them. So I think this is the best way to approach at it, and I really like Fons's view because he had these ideas for it. That's it I wanted to say.
Does anyone want to comment on colonizing the mind and the system?
Short say, because you said that maybe disruption is not the solution. True, or shutting down Shell won't help. Well, the funny thing is that lately Shell employees and Shell itself has been relating a lot to their employees that how they're being green and trying to be greener. Funnily enough, Shell has not only communicated to the outside world, but also has focused a lot on their employees, because that's their most valuable asset. So funnily enough, all the actions from Extinction Rebellion, Code Red, the Young Friends of the Earth, are pushing Shell inside to change. So I do think there's definitely a role, maybe smaller, but which has to be more activist just to wake up, let's say, the giant.
This is not disruption. They are trying to push the employees or Shell to do best because they are trying to give them this mindset that you have to work towards
sustainability. So they create a mindset in these employees or in some employees from Shell to work towards sustainability, and then they bring the change within Shell. So you attracted their mindset, you colonized their mindset, but in a good way, and then they made the change. So that's what I'm saying. You didn't disrupt their mindset. You actually developed their mindset. You colonized it in a good way. That's what I'm saying.
I was strategized.
Yeah.
No, colonized.
So that's what we're actually doing. I would like to use the metaphor of chemistry. As a chemist, I like to deconstruct and to connect things again, to make new kinds of compounds. And that's what we actually do. That's why we need all these type of organizations, but they're very fractured. And now what we finally see in policy landscapes is that we now have a climate gezant, a climate ambassador going through all the countries. So he has an external role, but he also has an internal role to finally bring all these new types of green organizations together. The old school ones, but also the new ones. And what we try to do as with the Climate Energy Dome is also to help where are we positioned and to align each other's, because the opinions don't differ that much. It's really about how do we do this in the next 30 years and what's efficient and what's with the less costs. But also with the same values that we offer. And we, with KEK, we have not made a manifesto, but we made 10 points on which we all found basis. People from Urgenda until the real corporates really in the oil and gas industry.
Okay. Did one of you want to say something?
Yeah.
Yes?
What I think is coming up, and it's not being called for what it is green capitalism. That's, I think, what we're trying to talk about. I mean, green capitalism is such a funny concept. You can dress a pig in silk, but it's still a pig. It's the idea of unstoppable growth on a finite planet, and it's just not working. And I can use the example of REDD+, which essentially equates ecosystems in different parts of the world. It says, okay, I can destroy this landscape, and in return, I'll just plant 1,000 trees in Uganda, and we're done.
Come on, that's not the mentality anymore. If you look at Renature, that's a company. We see that Circular turns up at students. This mentality of circular economy is totally already different and can still compromise, can still find a solution within this extractive system.
So maybe you want to comment on that with Renature?
Yeah. Yeah. These debates, big debates, are very, very tricky to get real with. Yeah, I guess something like what we do with Renature is, it is working within an extractive capitalist system, but it could survive without. So, yeah, what to say? We're trying to find these solutions that actually...
I have an online question then is, we discussed that today capitalistic system is wrong and should be destroyed, but what can we do in these lost 12 years that the scientific community has given us? So maybe if you're saying that it can or cannot be, you know, yeah, what
the last
I'm sorry.
well, the last 12 years that we have is not that the world is suddenly going to literally end. It's the idea that we're going to tip over a threshold which is going to continue to make things worse and worse without us being able to sort of roll back the clock. Terrible things are already happening. Disasters are already happening. We're talking about the end of the world, but that's not going to happen. But there are tragedies happening every day that we have opportunities to try and do something different about. I guess the way I try to approach it is you take a look at any context, and there are ways that you can do things which may be more able to cope with a future that is bad, or actually make the future better, and ways that are worse. So you try and take the things in that situation that you see as being a positive change, and you do something about it. It's very easy to get wrapped up in very, very big arguments. It's not important to have big arguments, but I do think it's important to bring it down to the scale and the level at which you can actually do something and do it.
So maybe this is where the landscape approach comes back into it.
I really like the landscape approach because it connects. Yeah.
Yes, question. Although I did promise you over there for you. Yes, maybe we can have a quick pass the parcel, hot potato. Very interactive.
Hello, thank you so much. So I observe that we all here represent a partialized side view of society among so many others. We here, including me, support that we should hold back, reevaluate our systems and forward initiatives as the ones you all talked about. However, I feel like we're leaving out technology. And a huge part of our world right now believes that technological advancements are the ones that could address the current problems and issues that we're talking about right now. And they're really fast pacing, they're moving very fast, and they also support that we can keep going with these advancements without compromising our wealthy lifestyle and this complicated capitalistic system. So my question is probably to Malik or any other panelist that would like to have an opinion on that. Do you have an argument against that? Do you believe that indeed technological advancements alone cannot take over, cannot address all these issues? Thank you.
Really good question. I am a firm believer in technology. It's brought us like untold benefits that we don't realize until like we see the tangible benefits in our hands. My problem with it is the system under which it operates. So, for example, if Monsanto, for example, patents a seed which it then sells, that seed is developed under advanced technological systems, but it's designed to make sure that those farmers who buy it keep coming back to that same company. So we do need technology. Technology forms a massive part of it. You talk about these advanced solar panels that don't take up vast tracts of land, that follow the route of the sun and absorb as much energy as possible. All amazing things. So it's definitely part of the solution. But we need to challenge, like, under whose authority they are operated and owned. If you can't change the ownership of technology and give power to the people who need it most, then we're just running in the same circles.
I'd like to comment on it. Like some services that we do, like airplanes, like I think what I see, that's just a report published by CE Delft, which is placed in Delft about energy strategies and circular economy. And there was research done in Delft, and they said, hey, could the airplane industry in the world just go on by replacing by fully biokerosene or even electric? Well, the answer is if you want to stay within the line of Paris, you need eventually a quotum somehow, a political one that needs to be decided, because it's not possible in such a short time to build all these biorefineries if you want to also choose a political action that you really use also different types of arable land for transportation. However, I agree that it's possible to have long-term transportation. If you look at the Hyperloop, if you look at digital technologies, with the augmented reality, I see more and more cool videos on Instagram that they have flying dragons in stadiums, so that you don't need to fly for conferences. I think it's ridiculous that a scientist goes to 3 conferences by an airplane. I think one could be doable. But it's really about how do we as a society agree how we can invest in radical innovation with a lot of money for research to develop new types of batteries. Like electrical airplanes will be available in 2070, 2000, with the predictions what the chemists do.
And the battery is the most important problem. Like, I mean, electric cars now are giving a solution to fossil fuels, but they don't give solution to chemical waste. So that's another, for example, topic. So yeah, we need a technology to address.
Tyrion, maybe you have something to add?
My thought on technology is that, of course, it's vital that we use technology that is available to us. The thing is, you have to ask, what's the technology for? Is the technology for a purpose, or is the technology the purpose itself? Like if you're buying a new iPhone every year because that's the newest technology, is that really a good way of using technology? If you're a farmer who needs to save an hour per day on your working day, and you can find an appropriate technology, it might not be, it might be a mobile phone app to manage your crops. It might be a fork that is the right size of your bed, so you only have to go up your bed once. It's appropriate technology that can help you do something that you need to do. That's really the most important thing. Technology for its own sake is pointless, but technology, innovation is fantastic, can be fantastically useful. Yeah.
May I add something into that? Also for me, it's quite scary that technology can form an elitarian society, in the sense that we are born to learn how to plant and to make crops, but we are not born to learn how to use technology, or how, for example, if our air is so polluted, then we will, and if we base our planet and our societies on technology, then the vulnerable people will directly depend on the elitarians that own the technological knowledge. They will not know how to survive without clean air. Yeah. That's my point.
Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, that's what we currently see in China. But what I see is that there's new environmental activism over there, and they use the caps. They now stopping coal power plants mainly because of those regions. And even though China does not have the same type of democratic system as we have, they still have got one political party and still people are involved. And it's the power of storytelling and convincing others that eventually when something is harmful for the people, but also in their environment, and if they value their nature, China has also a lot of pride about their own cultural and environmental heritage. That still will be protected. So I don't believe in such a future that only the elite will dictate and that the poor will need expensive technology to save themselves.
So I think we need to wrap up now, kind of hone back in to what we were discussing, because I think climate change is, I mean, it's a complex problem. It's a wicked problem, as you know, we've heard our lecturers say 1,000 times before. And I think this did highlight that there is a lot of complexity involved. And I think what is maybe a challenge that we're going to have is to converge on our perspectives, because even within, you know, a room of 8 people, we have 8 different perspectives, 8 different angles on it. And when we're talking about co-creation, the idea is we need to kind of get on the same page, especially when we consider what you mentioned, Einstein, and also with Malik, how we phrase the problem is also how we're going to propose the solutions. And the aim of the GLF is to highlight practical and immediate solutions to climate change. So I think what we've realized here is, by looking at this lens of co-creation for climate smart knowledge, is that we need to agree on what the problems are. We need to go down to the root causes. We need to essentially find some form of common ground. And on that note of rooting deeper, can we have the microphone down? We have a small surprise. Donatella Gasparro, would you join us on stage? And she's going to introduce yourself, please. You do it so well.
Should I don't know, invade?
Right in front of me. Yeah, you can cover me.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Thank you a lot for having me here. I've been asked to conclude this 2 days, actually. So Saturday, the workshop day, and today, the panel discussion with the poem. So that's what I'm going to do now. And this poem is called Root Deeper. If I feel like I'm drying out, you're drying out too. When I rain on you. No way to turn nor jump when soil falls all around you. No hug can hold a cut-down tree. One thing is left to do. Root deeper. Throw your roots all over and hold it all together. Forgive the wind, forgive the inaction. Make yourself a tool for recreation. If you revive, so do I. If you start to photosynthesize, everything will be green, and so will I. Haven't you seen the lianas hanging from my nails? They are reaching out for soil, and so am I. I'm reaching out for soil to plant me, feed me, be the cathedral for future kisses. Let me be a creek. Haven't you seen the constellation of stones opening the way into my iris? You won't drown, there is no risk for falling. If you're together, drop and jump, fish and motion. That's what I want. To be one with water that runs. If only I was less human and more rain, less flesh and more flight, I wouldn't have feared wing flutters. I could have run down rivers bloodless, but I cannot. And so I stop. I breathe, I thank, I bow to what's greater than me and makes me great because vulnerable. I am not young. The water I cry landed on this once incandescent rock way before the gift of laughter, way before a timeline was invented, way before me and you was even a distinction. There is no boundary, no definition. If I dry out, you dry out too. And when I rain on you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Donatella. I hope you liked that poem as much as I did. We also had it in the workshop, and yeah, Donatella is also hosting a poetry slam tonight, right? Yes. So I think now it's my task to wrap up, which I think you're all really happy that you don't have to do, because it's really going to be quite difficult. So we were talking about activism, we were talking about research, we were talking about practice-based approaches, and we highlighted so much overlap in them. And also, you guys felt the need that from your stance, the silos I put you in, that you could contribute to all the other themes. So, but I think that one theme that did sort of emerge in all three categories, in activism, in research, and in practice, and this is what we tried to represent here, is the idea that we need to be more inclusive. So whether this is in the practical sense of democratizing science and ensuring that people are involved in science, their interests are involved in science, and then, or whether this is morally to ensure an inclusive mindset. Finding a common ground, and Henry Mentick would say through love, a common ground of love and care for the planet in a sustainability and in a responsibility that translates into accountability then. And I think it's almost ridiculous that we still have to have this conversation about the need that we need to be more inclusive. And I did say that we were going to advance the conversation here in the beginning. And calling for more inclusiveness in activism, in research and practice is something that we still need. But I think that we have shown throughout this two-day event that there are practices and approaches and pathways to activism that actually empower and inspire agency. And while there might be sacrifices, it may be a dystopia or not, and there are ways forward that we can do this effectively without too much dystopia, again. And and I think the beauty of this is that given a platform to share insights then with the global community, I think that we have managed to make the first step to advancing this conversation. Us as individuals and also with the audience here, we're taking this first step together. And Raki from Western Papua really beautifully put it that every step in the right direction feels like magic. So I do feel like, we're making a little bit of magic here. And I think that it is a huge achievement that we've managed to drop the boundary objects and the mediators between us, between the organizations or whatever silos that we represent. And we now do have the means to connect people from all walks of life. So I do think that it's time to drop the preamble and to root deeper. And I have it's kind of like a rap, but it wasn't meant to be one. But, you know, sing, song, composition. But, yeah, so I think that if we stand united as a front with common core values, not setting our differences aside, but really embracing the diversity that we have, then this is how activism can activate and research can generate. And then I think practice can actually instigate. And this is how we co-create. Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, yeah, so that was, yeah, I practiced that a couple of times. But now what I think I'd like to do is bring the Wolf team on the stage. I'd like to introduce these guys and maybe a round of applause for... Yeah, and I think you guys can stand up too. Yes, and I think, yeah, this is the point where I thank you on behalf of everyone else. We thank you. Can you all be seen? Yeah, maybe we stand up all together. Yes? So we're looking straight there, but also there, so to the GLF. And yeah, I think, yeah, we should be very grateful for having the space to connect, but I think we should also be proud of ourselves that we took the first steps. You know, we have the right and the duty to be here. So, yeah, I think that's really cool. Yeah, that's it. And now live, cut it. Wow. You did a good job. Are we off? Are we still live?